thing back together in my my brain. So anyway, you might wonder, yeah, Zooks. Pardon me, I have a lot of trouble with postnasal drips, so I sound like gravel Gertie here. Okay, so you might wonder how in the world I ended up in Greenland. Well, many years ago, about 35 or so, I belonged to an organization called Earthwatch, and they did all sorts of trips all over the world, archaeology, paleontology, wildlife, humanitarian, and I happened to notice an archaeology dig in Greenland. And I don't know, Greenland just seemed fascinated because it has this name Greenland and it's mostly an ice cap. So I called about it and the woman discouraged me because she said Greenland was really, really hard to get to. And this was 35, 40 years ago. So anyway, of course, lately we've been hearing a lot about the Greenland ice cap melting. And so, you know, Greenland's been sort of in my mind. And I went up to northern Yellowstone in 2018, and I have a friend who's a wildlife biologist and Arctic researcher by the name of Jim Halfpenny, and he lives in Gardner, Montana now. And so I wanted to see if he was going to be around so I could stop in and say hi, because I hadn't seen him for years. Well, I went on his website and was looking around, and of course he was going to be out of town guiding a field trip. But I happened to notice that he was doing a trip to Ilulissat, Greenland in September. And I got a hold of him after he got back from his other trip, and I signed up for this one. So I was all excited because I would get to see Jim again, and because I finally get to Greenland. And Ilulissat is actually above the Arctic Circle, so I would also get to go above the Arctic Circle. So we left. So anyhow, we had to get ourselves to Iceland, which is up here. And I'll go to the next slide. I think I'll go to the next slide. Okay. So Ilulissat is where this arrow is. The capital, excuse me, of Greenland is Nuuk. And dang it, I'm having trouble here. Is Nuuk, which is here, which is below the Arctic Circle, and Reykjavik is this blue dot over here in Iceland. So we needed to get to Iceland to Reykjavik, and then we would take a small commuter plane, a turboprop, over to Ilulissat. So why would you go to Ilulissat? Well, it's above the Arctic Circle, so you can learn about life above the Arctic Circle. It's the third largest city in Greenland with about 4,600 people. And near Ilulissat is the Ilulissat Ice Fjord UNESCO World Heritage Site. And they have some ancient ruins from previous Inuit communities going way back, you know, almost 2,000 years or so. Greenland Ilulissat has about 4,600 people in it, and roughly, and it's the third largest city in Greenland. I said that, but it was founded in 1741. The island country of Greenland is roughly 80% of it is covered by the ice cap. There's all of 56,000 people in the country. It's an autonomous territory of Denmark, and they provide foreign affairs, defense, and their Danish krone for currency. The majority of the residents are Greenlandic Inuits, and with some Danes and definitely a mix of Greenlandic and other Europeans. The official language is Greenlandic, which is an Eskimo Aleut language, but most of the people there speak Greenlandic and Danish, and a lot of people speak English as well. So beside the World Heritage Site, the Ilulissat Glacier is there. It's the fastest moving glacier, and the most productive glacier in the Northern Hemisphere. And most productive means that it spews off a lot of icebergs. And so a bunch of this is all ice cap, but off of the ice cap, like down here in the Lulasat and stuff, it turns into glaciers that then flow into the sea. And the glaciers, when they calve, they give off icebergs. And these icebergs are huge. There's also great fishing in this area. There's whales that we could watch. There's small and calving glaciers we could go to. Just outside of town are these humongous icebergs, which you'll see slides of. And at the time of year we were there, towards the middle to end of September, the northern lights might appear. So it was an opportunity to live for a week in a small town in Greenland and see what their lifestyle is like. Now, being above the Arctic Circle, that means that the sun sets for the winter around our Thanksgiving, and it doesn't come up above the horizon again until around January 13th, at which time the people in Lulasat throw a big party because the sun's coming back. And then in the summer, the sun doesn't set between mid-May to mid-July. And just in the week that we were there, the length of a day changed by almost an hour in 7 days. So it's sort of interesting how the world tilts or the earth tilts and what happens to daylight. So anyway, let's get on, so I'm not talking so much. On the first day, Saturday, we flew to Lulasat. And so we all went down to this little small airport in Reykjavik near downtown, not the big international one. And we flew on the turboprop. Later, we walked to icebergs. And then since this was an educational trip, there were nightly lectures and assignments. And the assignments weren't like written or anything. They were just things to do, things to think about, people to talk with. So as we approach Greenland, this is the east coast of Greenland. You can see the mountains and you can see icebergs down here. And the littler things are called bergy bits, which we'll see more of later. And then you can see this here is a glacier that's flowing off the ice cap down into the sea. And the farther inland we got, the more you can see the peaks are getting more covered by the ice cap. And in places the ice cap is, and maybe that's sort of a was, 2 miles deep. So 2 miles deep of ice. And of course, again, it's melting rapidly. So that'll be something interesting to see what happens in the future. So this was the little plane that we flew in. It was comfortable and it wasn't quite full, so that gave us a little bit of room to move around. When we landed in Lulasat, it was lightly snowing, which surprised Jim, because usually I guess they had pretty good weather about then. Then this is the little airport, and it blew my mind. We walked into the airport, we got our luggage, nobody checked our passports. There was no customs to go through. We just picked up our luggage, headed to the restroom, and got on the shuttle bus to our apartments. And the bus driver explained something to the effect of, it's so hard to get to a place like Lulasat that, you know, if you're a nasty person or something and you get there, you know, they're going to figure it out and it's going to be hard to get out of there. The flights only went from Reykjavik to Lulasat like 2 or 3 times a week. So if you missed a flight, you had to wait a while. And if the next flight was full, you know, it was. So anyway, it's not the easiest place to get to, but probably not as bad as it was 35, 40 years ago. So this is a picture of our apartment. I shared a room with Mary, who lives in Livingston, Montana. There were 9 of us on the trip, including Jim, our leader. So it was a cute little apartment. You know, it had a bathroom and a shower over there behind the kitchen. There was a closet, a little refrigerator, 2-burner stove, of course, the microwave. There was a big pot to heat water in, the 2 beds. And then over here to the right, there was a table for 2 people. And we happened to be lucky enough to have a Wi-Fi router in our room. So we had really good Wi-Fi for free. Okay, so in the afternoon, Ilulissat's here. You can see where the landing strip for the airport is here. And this area down in here, and I think going all the way up in here, oh, there that is the World Heritage Site. So the bottom line is we're going to walk from the town of Ilulissat out here so we can see out into Baffin Bay and see some glaciers and the Arctic tundra. And we'll talk about that more later. So they have a boardwalk going across the tundra. This is all Arctic tundra. We're here in Colorado, where there's no trees, it's alpine tundra. So they're similar but different. And no trees grow above the Arctic Circle. So you're not going to see a tree in any of my slides. So as we were walking down the boardwalk, I was close to Jim, and I saw these big white things out here. So I asked him, I said, is that part of the glacier or is that icebergs? And he goes, those are icebergs, which blew my mind. These things are huge, and you might get an idea about how huge they are. And then we walked up a little bit farther, and this is the end of the Ilulissat ice fjord. Now the ice fjord comes off of the glacier. It's about 3,300 feet deep, except when you get to the very end. And over the years, as the glacier has advanced and receded and advanced and receded, and you know, it's done it in different lengths. And right now it's pretty far back. It's built up a terminal moraine, which is only maybe 600 feet deep. So you can see the iceberg here, and you can see how sort of jaggedy it is, where these over here are smooth. So the smooth icebergs have actually rolled over somewhere in their lifetime, and the jaggedy iceberg has not rolled over. So this is probably sort of what it looked like when it broke off from the glacier. And when they get down here, since the terminal moraine is only about 600 feet deep, and these glaciers can be up to 395 feet tall above sea level, and you only see 10 to 15% of them. So the rest of them are underground, under the ocean. So if you think just in round numbers, if this is 100 feet high, there's probably like 900 feet of iceberg underneath. And so it gets hung up on the terminal moraine. And it's not until they either melt or they also give off little icebergs that they actually can get over the terminal moraine and get out into the Baffin Sea. So one of the things, so we're walking, of course. Ilulissat has roads. As you can see, there's a car and there's a road. But there are no roads that go from Ilulissat to anywhere else in Greenland. The only way you can get to Ilulissat is either by boat or by air. So that's another little background. So after, you know, we were in the apartment and everything. Oh, before we went on our little walk here, we went to lunch at Cafe Iluliak, which is run by Thai or Filipino people. I never could figure out which. I guess the Thais and the Filipinos came to Greenland because of the fishing, because it sure seems like an awful harsh environment compared to Thailand or Philippines. Anyhow, I had a musk ox burger, which was pretty good. It was juicy and it tasted a little gamey, and Mary sort of suggested it had like a little venison taste. So I was trying to be brave and try some fare I've never had and probably never will have again. So anyway, on the way back from seeing all those big icebergs, you can see the land that's not covered by glaciers and ice cap is very rocky, and it's mostly granite. And these are sled dogs. Now, we call them sled dogs and we call them sleds, but up there they call them sledges and sledge dogs. So this guy is feeding his sledge dogs, and they keep them separated to make sure they don't catch any type of disease from each other. And they stay outside, and evidently they like being outside. And this is one across the street who sort of looked to me like it's saying, when is my turn? I'm hungry. So anyhow, you can see some of the sleds. This guy had a little house. And the other thing about Greenland is, like, I don't know if it's true for all of Greenland, but especially the places where the culture, or, you know, they depend on having sled dogs. If somebody in a Lulasat wanted to buy a Labrador, you know, a golden lab, and bring it into a Lulasat, they would not be able to. They really try keeping their sled dogs, you know, a pure strain and not get any other dog genes mixed up with them. And it's possible that, you know, way back in the past that, you know, dogs and wolves got bred together, and that's how they ended up with these sled dogs. So then at dinner, we went to a place called Cafe Inuit, which I figured would be run by Inuits, but it was run by Indians, but I think they were actually from Germany. So again, being brave, this is a whale steak. Now, I don't know what kind of whale, but around Ilulissat, they have a lot of humpback whales, and they also have some fin whales. And remember, whales are mammals. So it was fairly similar to a beef steak. You know, it had some little chewy spots in it, like a steak might have. And I don't remember that it had a really odd taste. It just tasted good. And then this over here is German Spätzle, but it's done as noodles. So that's partially where the German comes in. And then after dinner, we would go back to Jim's room, and he would give us a lecture on something about the Arctic. He might give us an assignment, like to go down to a certain spot and sit and just watch the icebergs and sort of see what we're feeling. Or we're supposed to talk to a Dane, a Greenlandic person, an Inuit, and you know, somebody else, and just, you know, learn a little bit about Ilulissat, or go down to the harbor and see what type of catch the fishermen were bringing in, and see how the fishermen did their job. So then the next day, we went on a walking tour of Ilulissat, and then we went out in a boat to look at the icebergs. And the largest icebergs can be 1.25 miles wide, the 396 feet or so above sea level. And again, only 10 to 15% of the ice is above water. So this here was a little place where people were doing a lot of carving. And before I forget, if you'll notice up here, there's an H and a 7. Well, back in World War II, the maps of Greenland were so bad, and the military, I'm guessing maybe the US military, needed to know where to drop things at. So there would be a building in town that would have like an H7, and later we'll see one that's H8. So they would know what to drop where. So a little bit of interesting thing. One thing, when you're in Greenland, you have to watch what you buy, because even though it's perfectly legal to buy it in Greenland, it may not be legal to bring it back into the United States. So I didn't buy anything from the carvers, but they had some really pretty stuff. And I would have loved to have brought some seal skin slippers back, but that wouldn't have gotten through US Customs. So then we went down to the harbor, and you can see these are all the little fishing boats that local people own. And this is a whale jawbone, probably a humpback whale. It's pretty big. They have big mouths. And then we got up into some of the neighborhoods. And so this would be a house, obviously. And they had their sled dogs. They had a greenhouse for growing vegetables. And I guess hardier vegetables, maybe like kale, they could grow outside. And you can see it's another gray day. And you can see another big iceberg. And then this is looking down at the house from another angle. And out here, they're drying fish. And you'll see pipes. And you see a lot of rock all over the place. Well, the land's very rocky, so it's really hard to bury things like electrical lines, water pipes, sewer pipes. So they have, these are probably, I would guess, electrical. So they've put stuff in pipes. And some people have running water and some people don't. So again, these are just more houses, and you can see more pipes sort of strung all over the place. You can see one of the little fishing boats, a bigger fishing boat, and another big iceberg. Now, this is a place for the people who don't have running water. They come to these places and they can get water here. And since they don't have running water in their houses, they don't have flush toilets. So they have to use a toilet bag, on a frame. And then when the toilet bag gets full, they wrap it up, they put it somewhere outside their house. Somebody comes and takes it away and probably leaves them some more bags. Now, they don't have for the people who do have water, they don't have a sewer treatment plant in town. All the sewage goes right into the bay, which I thought was sort of disgusting, but whatever. And then this is their little hospital, and it looks out onto the bay. So it has a beautiful view, just like our St. Anthony's Hospital up here in Summit County has a beautiful view of the mountains. And I guess they treat a lot of TB, alcoholism, and like depression and stuff at this place. But at least they have a hospital. And then these are probably water, maybe sewer pipes, and you can see how they've insulated them and stuff, because, the land is permafrost underneath, and it gets cold there in the winter. So they have to keep the pipes from freezing. And it was the middle of September, so there were still a few daisies blooming. And then after lunch, we got to sort of were on our own, and we had free tickets to go to the History Museum and to the Art Museum. And so, we're sort of walking around town, and there's people walking their little kids in strollers. People actually had baby carriages. I hadn't seen a baby carriage in years. And, people were riding bikes, kids were on scooters. So, they sort of seem like people anywhere else in the world that, you might go to, people here at home. And the one thing is they have taxis in town, and the taxis you really have to watch out for because they come zipping around corners. And not everybody owns a car in Ilulissat. And so they often take a taxi, if they're going grocery shopping or to doctors or whatever, just to get around town. So Mary and I went to the Art Museum, and they had a lot of cool paintings of like Ilulissat way back when. And then they had, this little display here, this polar bear, and I think this is a raven. And this is the young artist who painted them. And she was working there at the museum, and I guess she works there every year for a few weeks. And her name's Lisa Kreutzmann, and she lives south of Ilulissat in a small town of like 500 people. And she's gone to art school in places like Nook, and I can't remember if she'd gone to Denmark or not. But anyhow, her English wasn't great, but we could all communicate pretty well. And it was really fun talking to her. She was very bubbly and friendly and just a joy. And then as we walked back to our apartments, we passed this. In some ways, snowmobiles are replacing dog sled teams. And of course, with the ice melting, the bays and stuff don't necessarily freeze as much, as long, or as thick as usual. So the dog sleds are sort of endangered in a way. And I thought it was interesting that this car was plugged in. And then that evening, we went on an iceberg tour. So this is the little boat we were in. It held maybe 10 people. And Jim made all the arrangements for tours and stuff through a company called World of Greenland. And so the boat would have a captain, of course, and then it would have a guide to tell us what was going on and point things out to us. So these are just some of the icebergs. And we went in the evening just because of the evening light on the icebergs is pretty cool. And then this, we got out, and these are, again, the bergy bits I was talking about. There, you have a bigger iceberg, and if you'll notice, there's a gull on top here of this iceberg, and then you have a jagged iceberg, some smooth ones. So we'd be motoring along through the bergy bits, and, they'd sort of clunk along the side of the boat. And suddenly, the captain stopped, and then he'd back up. Oops. And then he'd stop, and then he'd back up, and I'm sitting there going, are we stuck in the ice? And it didn't really seem like we should be because it wasn't that thick. But, I couldn't figure out why he was backing up and pulling forward and backing up and pulling forward, until what he was doing was he was giving our guide, Christopher, a chance to pick up a piece of black ice. Now, black ice has no air in it, so it's very clear. And the white stuff has air in it, so it's white. And anyhow, so I think he actually used this piece of ice to chop up and put in some drinks. But I thought it was sort of cool. Black ice, I mean, I would not have thought of that as black because it's clear, but so I learned a few things, obviously. And just, more of this sort of cool light. And I didn't have like a super fancy camera, so, and you can just see how high it is and sort of icy it looks, and then smooth, so it had rolled over sometime. Okay, so then on Monday, we were supposed to go on a helicopter trip to the ice cap. Well, it was very foggy, so the helicopter was canceled. The helicopter cannot fly in fog, but evidently it can fly in wind and snow and rain. So we had sort of a day. So I had a chance to go to the History Museum. Jim gave us some talks on some exploration and research he had done with some other people on the east side of Greenland. And it sounded like they had quite the trip. That was a number of years previous. It gave me a chance to go to the grocery stores, and also there was a local fish market. So this is Knud Rasmussen's house. And Knud was a Greenlandic Danish explorer. He was born and raised in Greenland, in Ilulissat, in this house, which is now a museum. And he was an anthropologist, so he recorded a lot of stuff about the Inuit, the Greenlandic people. And he was also a big defender of the Greenlandic people because they suffered from Norwegian colonialism and Danish colonialism, just like the native tribes here suffered under the hands of the English and the French and whoever else. So he was a spokesman for them or whatever. And then we went to this, I wandered down, there's this old church, and this was built in 1792. And you can see again, lots of icebergs. And then this was the apartment building we were staying in. It was really small, it was only like 6 units in it. But from there, you could see over at least part of Ilulissat, and again out to the bay with the different size icebergs. And this was one of the grocery stores. they had like 4 different grocery stores in town. I didn't usually shop at this one because it was a little farther away, but this was on the way back from the World Heritage Site. And it is really fun to try shopping for anything in a store in Greenland because all of the labels are in Greenlandic and Danish. It is rare to find a label in English. So luckily Danish has, I think, some roots in German, a Germanic language. So I could, sort of get some of the words. And for example, I wish I had taken a picture of a label on food, because like we have calories, they call it energy. and of course they do everything in kilocalories, which I discovered seemed to be the same as our calories. But it was really interesting to go in and see what what they had in terms of different types of food and veggies and box stuff and whatnot. And I'm not sure what the 21 means. If I knew, I've forgotten. But again, the 7 I think has to do with the fact that this is H7. And this was a newer grocery store that was almost across the street from the other one. I think it was a little more expensive, but they seem to have more fresh meat. Like you could buy a fresh chicken here, where across the street, I think everything was frozen. So, and I think there's a lot of smaller towns that are not super far from Ilulissat, maybe 12 miles, 25 miles. So some of those people probably come in and do their shopping at these places. Let's see, what else maybe did I do then? Oh yeah, I talked about the food labels. Okay. Actually, I went to the fish market a different day. So on day 4, we were going to go to see Eki Glacier, which was a smaller glacier, but it supposedly calved a lot. It was about 50 miles north of Ilulissat. So they fed us lunch, and we also sort of looked up at the Eki Glacier Lodge. So we're down here in Ilulissat, and we're going to motor our way up here to the Eki Glacier. And we had sunshine. So I took this picture. One, I thought the wake of the boat was pretty cool. And we basically had the same, I don't remember, it was the same boat, the Nisa that we had gone on that I showed you the picture of. And Nisa means dolphin in Greenlandic. Anyway, so this just gives you a little bit of an idea of what the countryside looks like. There's a lot of steep cliffs, not a lot of place to build towns and stuff. And then, you get up higher and you start getting either glacier or whatever. And then this is the Eki Glacier. And the Eki Glacier is about 650 feet high, and it's about 2.4 miles wide. And you can see over here where the glacier used to come up this far. So the glacier is receding, and we sat there. We were there for a couple of hours, and most of the time the captain turned off the boat, so we were just sort of floating along. And we kept watching, waiting, hoping that something would calve off. And every once in a while there'd be a little bit of a calve, like maybe a little spire would fall off and down, and then you get this little tsunami wave coming towards you. But they were really little. And amazingly enough, me who gets really seasick, even though I took a Bonine, I never got seasick on any of our trips in Greenland. When I got to Iceland, I turned totally green on a whale watching trip. So it was pretty nice. The ocean was fairly calm. And that's me. You can see that I'm dressed rather warmly. And I had my nice wool cap that I bought in Greenland, and I have mittens to match and an ear band. And then this is Jim, our fearless leader. And we had met each other years ago when we both used to go to a folk dancing group. So, and I hadn't seen him in probably 35 years. So it's really fun to see him again. And now let's see this one. This will just give you an idea of what it was like to sit in the boat for a couple of hours and have bergy bits and little pieces of iceberg sort of clunking along the boat. Okay, so as not to make everybody seasick or sleepy, that should be enough of that. And this was our fearless group. There were two other people, a couple, and the night before we were supposed to leave for Greenland, he tripped over something in the hotel room, and he fell into a coffee table and broke several ribs. And so he managed to come on the trip with us, but basically he was in a lot of pain. Basically all he could do was sit in the room in the apartment. And so sometimes his wife came with us and sometimes she didn't. So, oh yeah, this is Mary, my roommate. And then Barbara here also lives in Gardner, not too far from Jim. You can see my nice warm mittens. And then this here, Jim called it a Danish destroyer, and our guide called it a Danish research vessel. So whatever. Now at night, because there were I don't know if Jim ever got any sleep. He would check every once in a while to see if the northern lights were out. This is a picture I took of the northern lights, which I can't believe I actually got a picture of. When I look up into the sky, I see white. It looked like clouds to me. And, you know, other people, I guess eyes are different, and other people could see green. And, but anyhow, that's my attempt at taking a picture of the northern lights. And of course, we were by our apartment, so there's street lights and other things. So, but that's my northern lights picture. And my Greenland ones are even worse. Okay, so then the next day we got to go whale watching, and we got to go back to the heritage site with a guide. So we got to see some Inuit grays and Surmummiut, which was a long time little village near Ilulissat there, where because you can't build a house with wood because there was no trees, they built them out of peat. And I kept saying to Jim, is she saying they're pit houses or peat houses? And he goes, well, they were both. They were pit houses that were also made of peat. Okay. So now these are supposedly two humpback whales sleeping. And you can see big icebergs again. And dirty ones are, you know, soot or dust or whatever that's come in. So then we never saw a whale breach, you know, like you see those whales jumping way up and doing wonderful things, all those great pictures Frank Zuri's taken. This is about what we saw the whales. And they're flukes. And each fluke on a humpback is different. So it identifies that whale as, you know, like Joe humpback whale or Sally humpback whale. So that was sort of cool. And then here's again one of those little tiny fishing boats out there in the bay, and they're catching fish and they're cutting them up and throwing things like heads and tails overboard. And they have a very happy following of gulls. Now, this is the Royal Arctic Line that comes in, and this is how Ilulissat gets its supplies. So this ship arrives maybe 2 times during the summer, and it docks where you saw that Navy research vessel destroyer thing. And it brings everything. It brings gasoline, it brings food, it brings laptops and cell phones and clothes and everything. Now in the winter, this can get interesting because if the harbor freezes or this part of the Baffin Sea freezes, which it used to at least, you know, the ship might not be able to come in for 2 or 3 months. So somehow these people have to figure out what they need for the winter and make sure they have it before the ship can't come in anymore. I guess they might be able to get some stuff via plane, but it's a small airport with a small runway, so they can't get really huge planes in there. Now here again is a humpback close to an iceberg. And this one, we can see I zoomed in really far. This is a little one and this is the mommy, at least as far as I can tell. So keep that in mind for a later slide. And I just love the patterns on some of the bergs, you know, from erosion, from wind, from rain, whatever. So I just thought that was cool. So we went on the trip back to the World Heritage Site. And again, we're walking on the boardwalk through the Arctic tundra. And this is called cotton grass for obvious reasons. And this was the little thing in the billboard to say you were now entering the World Heritage Site. And again, we're out here in the Arctic tundra, and you can see a little depression in here. So this was one of the pit houses, and these are stakes sort of showing the location. So there was a pit house here made of peat that people lived in, and I think they started coming here about 2,000 years ago, and they only abandoned this place in about 1850, and people moved to Ilulissat. But there was good fishing in the area. There was a lot more wildlife in terms of muskox, reindeer, Arctic fox, Arctic hare. And Jim mentioned that if any four-legged creatures or seals appeared anywhere near Ilulissat, they didn't live for very long because people would shoot them and kill them for food. So, oh, actually, yeah. So this area has been inhabited. Oh, actually, for 2000 since 2000 before current era. So, it's been people have been coming here for a long time, and theoretically, the people who populated Greenland came from Canada, and then came across to Greenland. And this was my absolute favorite view. I just love, you know, it's blue sky. We have the rocks, we have the Arctic tundra, we have the little tiny fishing boat. And I just really, really thought this was sort of representative of, you know, a lot of Ilulissat. I mean, the wild part of Ilulissat. And then we walked up, and again, this is that one that you saw in the first slide where it was all gloomy. You can see it a little bit better. And this is again where the terminal moraine is stopping the flow of the glaciers and the ice as it's coming down the ice fjord. And just on the other side of that is the Baffin Sea. Now this here is an old Inuit grave. And if you look inside it, you could actually see a skull and some bones. And the old Inuits would bury their people in here. And this hill faces the ocean. And so they buried them with this gorgeous view. And these are called crowberries. So this is one of the little berry bushes that grows over there in the Arctic tundra. And I know I had some, but it was with apples. It was a apple crowberry tart, and I can't really quite or crisp. I can't really quite remember what the crowberries tasted like. And then this is, again, the fjord, the ice fjord is coming down here. This is actually called a melange, which is French for mixture. So it has the little bergy bits, the bigger icebergs, the big icebergs, the huge icebergs, and right out over here is the ocean. So this is the Ilulissat ice fjord. And then I just took another picture of a different dog. You know, they have long legs. They just came in different colors and stuff. And you can see the houses were pretty colorful, probably to help them get through gloomy times, because in the winter it would be dark, so you couldn't see the houses anyway. Okay, then next day, yay, the weather was good. We got to fly to the ice cap. And you'll see some aerial views of Ilulissat. We also went back out whale watching, and we wandered around the harbor. And I think that was the day I went to the fish market. And remember caribou haunches? I got to tell you about caribou haunches. So once again, Ilulissat, we flew out of the airport and the helicopter landing spot is up about here. And I swear this picture was from 2018, and it looks to me like this is the edge of the glacier here where stuff is calving off. But I think when we were there, the edge of the glacier was more back here. Either that or we landed somewhere else. But anyway, so that's what we're doing. We're flying up here. So again, this is not too far off of the airport. You can see Baffin Bay, the end of the ice fjord, and just it obviously had been snowing, and lakes. And Ilulissat gets its drinking water from these lakes. So this again is a little bit better picture of the melange and the bigger bergs in it and smaller bergs. Now we're up on the ice. We're not on the ice cap. You can't land on the ice cap. So the pilot landed and we got out and walked, and these are little Arctic fox tracks. And what in the world an Arctic fox finds to eat up here? Because normally, I guess when Jim had been up here in the past, there was no snow right here. It was just rocky terrain. But since it had been snowing, there was snow there. And again, you can see here, this is the ice fjord, and you can see up here onto the ice cap. And I kept wondering, why in the world do I have all of these shadows in my photos? Well, the sun is getting lower in the sky in Greenland at this time of year. And it was just that the sun was very low. And so no matter where you were, you ended up with these very long shadows. See, my legs are way down here. And then we could, if we wanted to, this is Jim and 3 of the other people on the trip. They're actually standing on the ice cap. Now, I didn't go over there because I was having a little bit of trouble walking in the new snow sinking. And I was just so mesmerized by the whole scene and just snow and glacier and little foxy prints. I just didn't want to waste any time. I wanted to spend all my time just enjoying being where I was. And this is our helicopter. So we can sort of see how little it is compared to glaciers coming off the ice cap and some of our people. And these are prefab igloos, and this is a research station where people go to and they study the Ilulissat Glacier and calving and everything. And that's our helicopter. I think there were 10 of us in there plus the pilot. And I happened to be the last one on, so I got to sit right next to this window, which is really cool. So this again is the glacier, and you can see how it's just cracking up, tons of crevasses and everything. This is the face of the glacier where the ice calves off and becomes big icebergs. And this is a better picture of it. And you can see a huge chunk had broken off here. And the pilot was really cool because he flew by one direction. So like people on my side of the helicopter could get a good view. And then he turned around so the people on the other side of the helicopter could get a good view. And Jim was telling us that sometimes such a huge chunk will break off of the glacier at once that it is actually recorded on seismographs around the world because it's just such a huge piece of ice falling down. It creates all these seismic waves. So we didn't see anything coming off though, unfortunately. And then this was just, again, looking down, you can see all these different bergs and just mess of ice that had come off of the glacier and was starting I think it was like typically 3 to 4 months to get down to the sea. And I just was fascinated by this. So you see a few pictures. So this is, again, looking up the ice fjord or down the ice fjord. And as we got towards the end, sometimes there'd be a little bit of open water and you can see out into the Baffin Bay. And, as the icebergs are heading out there. And there's even some thought that the iceberg that sunk the Titanic may have actually come off of this glacier, but I don't think there's any way to prove that. Just another view. Okay, now remember the mom and the little one. When we were flying, the pilot noticed these two whales. And so I think I got about the best picture of the two whales. Come on. Okay, cursor, there you are. So anyhow, that's a humpback whale and a little one, and it may or may not have been those other two I had the picture of. But I thought that was really cool to see these whales swimming among the icebergs. Again, another view, like I said. Okay, now we're over Ilulissat. So you can see the harbor here where all the fishing boats are. It's a little protected. The airstrip, you can see the lakes where they get their water from, you know, different houses, the hospitals over here, the downtown area is sort of in this area. And then this was the way we would walk if we wanted to go to the UNESCO Heritage Site. Oh, and they were building a visitor center there, a big visitor center, right about where the boardwalk started. And I looked it up and it looks like it's open now. So then, yeah, this is what the area, Ilulissat and environs looks like. And then I circled our apartments. And so we could just walk down the hill. And then this was where this is the world of Greenland. And then there were different restaurants and shops in the area. And I think the hospital was down off this way. And then if we wanted to go out to the heritage site, then we would walk up this way. Oh, come on. The post office was up here, and you could buy cell phones and tablets there. And then there were a couple more grocery stores. There was a sports complex, some restaurants and stuff. So it's and then the airport was out this way. You had to cross over this bridge. They do recycling. So we have recycling, and I don't know how to enlarge this, but there was recycling in Greenlandic and Danish. So this obviously is glass stuff, and this is cans and other stuff. And they have a hostel there. So one of the things I did that afternoon, one of our assignments was to go down to the harbor and see what the fishermen were doing. So there's this little iceberg in the harbor. This gull was just doing his gull thing, you know, making a racket. This gull started to land, but it was really slippery. And so he was sliding down and madly flapping his wings, you know, trying to catch himself. So I thought that was sort of fun. Then these are bigger fishing boats. And this is Royal Greenland, and it's a halibut processing plant. So while I was down here, if you remember the picture with the big whale jawbone arch at the dock there, I was there, and you know, one of these boats was parked there, might have been a smaller one, and this guy was carrying these things like around his neck, and there was a leg with a hoof on it. And you know, and I kept watching him bringing this stuff up, and they were going and loading it in a truck. And so I finally got my nerve up, and I went over and I sort of tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, "Caribou?" And he said, "Yes." And he shook his head, yes, and he gave me this big grin and patted me on the shoulder. So I thought that was sort of fun. This is their little fire department. And then this again, we went out to watch for whales, and obviously you see icebergs everywhere. So this is just a family out on their fancy little boat by this iceberg fishing. And, you know, just, I like the cracks in this one. And here we did get to see the flukes of a whale, and I thought this was a pretty cool iceberg with its pointy peak. And then if you notice, just sort of keep in mind the shape of this. And then this is the top of the iceberg up here. And then this is a guy in a boat going by there. So hopefully that also gives you a little idea of how big these bergs are. And this was just another scene, and I thought this was fun. This evidently was a layer of dust or soot or something that blew in from somewhere, and I made sort of an interesting line in the ice. And this is like the big Arctic, that Royal Arctic Line thing, and with a little tugboat. So again, you get a little bit of an idea of how big these icebergs are, because that was a huge boat. Okay, then on the last full day, we went to Rødebæk, which is, I guess, the Danish or English or an English word for it. And I can't even try to pronounce the Greenlandic name. So we went to this village. So again, we were down here in Ilulissat. The Eki Glacier was somewhere up in, it was up here. And so about 12 and a half miles north, there's this little tiny fishing village that we went to visit. So we got off. This was a big boat we were on. I liked the little boats. The big boat had tons of people on it. Well, anyhow, we got off, and this is a little post office and a little store. This is where they desalinate water. And I'll show you a closer picture of this place a little later. So this is the inside of the store. This village has about 26 people in it, 4 to 6 kids in the little grade school, which goes, anyhow, they go from, I guess, age 6 to 16. Then if they want to get any more schooling, they have to go to Ilulissat. And once, I can't remember, I think Ilulissat actually only goes to age 16. And then they either have to go to Nuuk, and sometimes families actually move to Denmark so kids can finish their schooling. So this was a really tiny little store, but you could buy all sorts of little supplies there and kids stuff. I just thought this was funny. There's like 4 to 6 kids in school. There might have been a few more in town. They had all this wonderful variety of kids stuff. Okay, now this building here is the only building in town with running water. And so if you want to do your laundry, you go to this building. If you want to take a shower, you go to this building. And again, you can see pipes all over the place. Some are probably electric. This probably is water. And again, the sewage just dumps right out into the bay. Now, see, this is Hotel Nordlys. Anyway, it's a bed and breakfast, I believe, and it's a Santa Claus residence. So I had to take a picture of this to send to my cousin's granddaughters. But I thought it was really cool because this is a Santa Claus residence. And then again, just wandering around town, some of the buildings, again, the rocky ground, big icebergs. I think this was seal meat that was drying. And here's H8. Now this building here used to be a really, really good restaurant that was owned and run by Germans, and people loved it. Unfortunately, they went out sailing one day, ran into some black ice, got thrown overboard, and died. So there's no good restaurant, there's no restaurant there anymore. But this was H8, like we saw H7 for Ilulissat, H8 was for Rødebæk. And then this is just looking back to the desalination, Santa Claus house, the shower, laundry room, and just a little village and some fishing boats. And here's a guy in his boat, cutting his catch, cutting off the heads and tails, throwing them out. And the gulls, of course, were very happy that he was there. He had a great following. Okay, so that was basically our last night, last day in Greenland. So we went to this fancy restaurant that was part of the Cafe Iluliak. It had a brewery there. So we had some of the brewery, I think it was Iluliak brew. I don't remember exactly what the name of the beer was that I had. And this is fresh halibut. And, they were big into asparagus and broccoli. And then Mary and I split an apple crowberry, not compote, crisp type thing for dessert. So anyway, Then the next day it was time to head back to Reykjavik. Oh, it's the Imiak Brewery. So by the airport, they have, not only is there Santa's residence up in Rota Bay, they have Santa's sled here. And they also have a really huge sledge here at the airport. So of course I had to have my picture taken with Santa's sleigh. Santa must be pretty big. Okay, then back on board, I had to take a picture. This is Danish. This is English, obviously. And this is Greenlandic. so anytime you saw a sign that had Danish and Greenlandic on it, the Greenlandic went forever. And of course, our slideshow is supposed to end with a sunset. So anyway, that's my story.
Thank you, Maryann. That was pretty interesting.
It really was. We really enjoyed it.
I feel like I've been there now.
Okay, everybody should be able to unmute themselves now.
Maryann, you didn't talk about temperatures. How cold was it there?
Maryann is muted.
Maryann, turn on your mic, Maryann.
Oh, okay. Now can you hear me?
Yep,
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
much better.
Sorry about that. I don't know how I got muted. Anyway, at the beginning, when we were doing things, he said it was the coldest it had ever been when he was there. So, it'd be down in the 30s, maybe into the 20s. And then the day that we flew to the ice cap, Jim said that was the hottest day it had ever been when he was up there on the ice cap, and there was no wind and it was sunny. So I don't know what the temperature was, but and when you go out in the boat, there's always some breeze, the boat's moving, so you're getting, it's getting cold air, and you could be inside, but of course, if you really wanted to see, you'd be outside. So we'd sort of be outside, get chilly, go inside, and you could see how I was dressed pretty warmly. And I had nice, big, heavy boots on with thick socks and several layers of pants and several layers on top and hats and mittens. So I think it was probably mostly in the 30s, and then